Aloha, como mai, and welcome to this week's edition of Just Cruisin', the podcast that's all about the world of travel. I'm Larry Jackson, owner of Cruise Holidays of Viera, and I'll be your cruise director for this week's edition. This week's edition is being recorded on Thursday morning, October 1st, 2020, and we're so glad you could be with us today. Well, I was hoping to have some really good news to pass on to you that maybe we had a date to resume sailing for cruise lines here in the United States, as yesterday, September 30th, was the deadline for the CDC's previous no-sail order. That deadline came and passed with no word from the CDC, nothing. All we got yesterday, September 30th, was a leak from supposedly the White House, provided it to us by Axios News. And as you know, I don't believe in fake news or their sources, but this is all we've got going on. Axios News, stop me if you heard this before, quoting two sources familiar with meetings held in the White House's Situation Room today. The two sources who cannot be named and were not authorized to speak. So that's why I say all we have is a leak from the news media. This morning, Thursday morning, the New York Times picked it up, so I guess that now makes it an official. But this is all we know at this point. According to this rumor, CDC head Robert Redfield said it was in the best interest of the public health to extend the current no-sail order through February of 2021. In doing so, he cited both the current state of the health crisis around the world and in the United States in particular, as well as the ability of the virus to spread easily within a cruise ship environment. However, again, this is according to the leaked report, Vice President Mike Pence seemed to veto Redfield's notion. Instead, according to the report, which cites two task force members, again, who can't be quoted and whose names are not prevented, Pence said that they would be moving in a different direction. Representatives of the cruise industry will now meet with White House officials on Friday to describe what Axios, this is the news source, said was an opportunity for the cruise lines to describe their transformation and dozens of ways that they will mitigate risk and ensure public health, which they've already done with CLIA's mandatory protocols that they released last week, and with the Healthy Sail Panel joint task force between Norwegian Cruise Lines and Royal Caribbean, who also released 74 points last week, which seems like, but I guess they have another meeting about that. Now, I'll remind you, I think way back 6 months ago when all of this started, the last time Mike Pence got together with the cruise industry was about a week before the voluntary March suspension of sailing back around March 6th or 7th, and they came away from that meeting with great support. Pence talked about the great support he was getting from the cruise lines and how he was very enthusiastic that this was just a temporary shutdown and they would be back very soon. And then that's the last word we've heard from the administration regarding the cruise lines. It's all gone to the CDC. And since the CDC has then proposed and imposed one set sail order after another, continuing to extend it, also requesting public comment, a period that ended on September 21st. Interestingly enough, what the public comment period created for the CDC was about 50,000 responses from an anti-cruise group who was using the opportunity to lobby against the cruise lines because they think the cruise lines pollute, kill whales and things like that. So the CDC's public comment period, rather than going to the cruise lines and asking them for their plans and considering those, they would rather get the comments from anybody who has a computer. But be that as it may, the CDC has not been extremely cooperative about resuming sailing. So let's see what happens on Friday. Again, I was hoping to have some good news for you. Now, further speculation from Axios is that the CDC will now, because of what Vice President Pence has suggested, will now go with the cruise lines' current suspension of cruising, which ends on October 31st. This is their next voluntary suspension that's scheduled to end October 31st, that the CDC will agree to that, and then we can move forward. Quoting this article a little bit more, this would bring the CDC's current no-sale order in line with the self-imposed suspension of services currently in place by CLIA. The fact that Redfield's, the CDC's organization, and the White House find themselves on opposite sides of the issue is not entirely surprising. For several months now, there have been discord between the two focused large. I don't know why people don't use comments anymore on issues related to the current health crisis. However, Axios quotes one senior official, again, who is not named, as saying that the cruise situation is an example of the task force weighing all the equities of the departments and agencies represented and making a decision that properly balances the public health impacts and the economic ramifications of the country. So the inference there is that the CDC, I go back to, I am totally puzzled at the CDC's attitude of allowing airlines to fly, hotels to reopen, casinos to open, resorts, theme parks, Disney World, those kinds of venues to open, but completely shut down the cruise lines without any dialogue whatsoever, any suggestions of what the cruise lines could be doing, even a hint of what it might look like from the CDC's viewpoint of when cruising starts again. So even when if we get an October 31st date, we don't know what the CDC is going to require as far as the protocols that will be in place. Will they adopt what the Healthy Sail panel has proposed? Will they be more stringent? Will they come with requirements that we just won't even be able to meet? Because again, I'm going to go back to what I've told you in previous podcasts. The three-legged stool here of resuming cruises, the first and foremost one is the CDC. Second is going to be the ports of call. Will they let us back in? And three, you, the public, whether you're going to want to continue or go back to sailing, given all of the impositions or the things that are going to be required of you, or the way sailing is going to look, the way cruising is going to look when we go back to sailing. So we still have basically all of those unknowns and maybe a little bit more definition of the time frame on this. My guess is if let's say the October 31st is the date that we can start. Well, obviously we can't start sailing on November 1st. We've got a lot of things to put into place. First of all these protocols have to be dealt with. We have to get the crews back to their ships. They've got to transit different countries that have different requirements as far as being able to fly from the country to the country. We've got to get those people back on the ships. We've then got to clear with the ports of call where we'd like to go to cruise, including the private islands in the Bahamas. That's not an automatic because those still belong to the Bahamian government and they still have say-so on whether we can go to those islands or not. So that's number two. Then we have to create schedules. We have to then sell the cruises and get you on board and get you willing to sign up and say, okay, here's my deposit, here's my final payment, I'm going to go with you and go cruising. So that's where we're at right now. I will also reemphasize that the very first ship with cruise lines that is acceptable to us, that being Royal Caribbean and Norwegian, that goes out of Port Canaveral, we will have a group on board. Linda and I will be sailing with you, and that's going to happen as soon as Viera.com. It's a great website with a lot of resources, a lot of great information about not only cruises, but about passport information, about visas and things like that. So I urge you to go there. It also allows you to contact us if you've got something in mind you'd like to research further, a trip, Land, we represent all of the major tour operators on land. We represent every single cruise line in the Cruise Lines International Association. We are authorized agents for all of those people. We have extensive knowledge of cruising, having been in business 17 years now and been on over 130 cruises. What does that mean to you? Well, that means that you get a personal touch to your next vacation. You get a person that you can talk to. You don't call an 800 number and hope for the best. You get someone who's knowledgeable, and most importantly, you get somebody who really cares about what happens to your next vacation. Besides our website, you can give us a call at 321-242-1331. Don't worry about what time zone you're in. We have an excellent answering machine, and we'll get right back to you. So please, we would be honored to help you plan your next vacation. By the way, we had a banner week this week at Cruise Holidays of Viera. We had 2 new cruise bookings for later on in 2021. So there is a little stir of interest out there and folks coming to start to have some confidence that we'll get back to sailing. And I know we're going to get back to cruising. It's just a matter of when. Another article I wanted to share with you this week is written by a lady named Johanna Jane Chill, and she is the news editor for Travel Weekly. Now, that's mostly an industry newsletter that we and the travel advisors read pretty extensively. And she wrote, it's more of an editorial than anything else. And I found it very interesting. I wanted to share it with you. And the title of her article is "An Unusual Dynamic is on Display as Cruise Lines Send Plans to the CDC." And she starts off with, relationships are central to the cruise industry, and in most instances, it's the cruise lines that hold the status of the senior partner. Whether with vendors, ports, or retailers, the lines have and frequently invoke the final word. That's very true of us in the travel advisory portion of this. It's true of the people who provide the shore excursions, the people that provide the food, the ports, the embarkation ports, what the terminals look like, the staffing of those, all of those things are pretty much dictated by the cruise lines because they are the 3,000-pound gorilla in the room when it comes to us having relationships with them. And we pretty much all toe the line as to what the cruise lines tell us is going to happen. But she continues, but in almost all these relationships, there is an end goal or mutual benefit, and the lines recognize that their success is built on the success of their partners. And it's a kind of, back to me, it's kind of an unusual relationship where they are the heavies and they dictate what's going to happen, but they know without the vendors putting the excursions together, without the travel advisors making the bookings and promoting cruising and putting people on their ships, they wouldn't exist. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. She continues, they have in their relationship with the CDC a relationship that is stunningly different from the norm. Whereas health authorities in other jurisdictions have sat down with cruise lines to work out ways to sail safely during the pandemic, the CDC has remained aloof, extending and re-extending its no-sail orders from U.S. ports and making clear that while it will evaluate input from the cruise industry, it is likewise evaluating criteria from other sources as well. Back to me. Again, this has been my biggest problem with the CDC is this lack of cooperation, of communication, which indicates when you're viewing this whole situation that they have no intent or no desire to see cruising returning. I don't know why this is. Someone at senior level at the CDC had a bad cruise at one time and wants to make sure nobody else ever has a good cruise. Someone at the CDC has shorted all the cruise line stocks. One of the reasons I think they keep extending this is they really thought some of the cruise lines would be bankrupt by now. But thanks to a lot of things that have been done in the Trump administration, those guys are still, the cruise lines are still afloat, and they're kind of disappointed at that, and so they're trying to see how far they can push this until they get some more cruise lines to go under. Anyway, we're back to Johanna's article here. This is a quote from Adam Goldstein, who is the chairman and CEO of Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, the parent company, and who is also the global chairman for CLIA, Cruise Lines International Association. Adam says, "We'd like to get into a serious discussion with the CDC about this. We were able to do that in Europe, and I think it served everyone's needs. So I don't want to presuppose what the outcome will be of a dialogue with the CDC. I'd just like to get into a dialogue with the CDC about what we've committed to and what they're thinking and what their expectations are and how we can work through this." Now, I think that's a very reasonable proposal that Adam is making here. Again, it's a mystery as to why the CDC will not engage in this type of discussion with the cruise lines. The cruise lines have, for most of the no-sail period, been sitting quietly on any frustrations they may have felt. But the success of Europe's sailings, and we've been telling you about the Grand MSC Grandiosa, has been making 7-day cruises out of Genoa, really with no problems from coronavirus, other than the first sailing, and a few really minor glitches that they have, but they successfully have been sailing. And now we have TUI, who is sailing to Greece. TUI is a German cruise line. I'll tell you a little bit more about them later on. But the success of the Europe sailings, whose timing immediately preceded the deadline last Monday for the lines to provide input to the CDC, put a little wind to their backs. Cruise line CEOs have made media appearances explaining their plans and hopes. Again, one of my big problems has been CLIA's quietly not saying a word about any of this, and they're supposed to be the lobbying organization. They should have been in Congress getting pressure put on the CDC. I don't know what's wrong with our Florida senators. All they do is come up with another set of proposals, which creates even more bureaucracy and is not going to get us any closer to sailing. Why pressure is not being put on the CDC by the congressmen and the senators from Florida is absolutely beyond me also. Brad Tolkien, who is the co-CEO of World Travel Holdings, this is a large consortium similar to the one we belong to called Travel Leaders, said the success of large ship cruising in Europe has changed the mindset of the cruise executives he's in contact with. They have gone from defense to offense. The Europe sailings are even more encouraging to Tolkien, again the CEO of World Travel Holdings, than the revealing plans or potential legislation. That's what I was talking about, what the Florida senators have proposed. He says, "Seeing is believing. We've now had a dozen 7-night cruises between MSC and Costa that have gone flawlessly. We can rely on all of the experts and protocols and things on paper, but when you put it into implementation and see that it's working, I can't imagine that it's not the most significant influencing factor that is taking place. Okay, we give them 74 protocols. I don't know if it's going to work. Okay, we got dozens of ships cruising with several thousand passengers in Europe. I don't know if that's going to work. Well, what do you want?" Okay, that's really where my frustration level is. Tolkien, again, noted that the recommendations that CLIA and cruise lines submitted to the CDC mirrored what MSC and Costa are doing in Europe, such as testing everyone prior to boarding, controlling shore excursions, masks, controlling cruise quarantine before getting on the ship, all of that sort of thing. He believes that those examples, coupled with the industry's coordinated response on its health and safety plans, will make the CDC respond more positively. Well, I'm not very sure about that. And I guess that one of the other things that I've been saying during this whole thing is that we know how to control viruses. We have done a great job with the norovirus. You have to think back maybe 12, 13 years ago. It would be many times during the year you would hear about an outbreak of norovirus aboard a ship and come back in. We'd have hundreds of passengers sickened. It was a total nightmare from a publicity standpoint, and the cruise lines all got together and aggressively tackled this virus, which is much worse. The norovirus is much worse than the coronavirus. I don't care what the media says. Norovirus, it lasts longer. It's spread by contact. It's almost completely immune to disinfectants. And the cruise line industry has done a wonderful job of controlling it to the point you rarely hear about a ship having an outbreak. And even then, it's only a very few amount of passengers, a very small percentage, because they know exactly what to do when it happens. Okay, back to the article. The release of the reports and attendant publicity was encouraging for travel advisors whose businesses have also been greatly impacted by the no sail order. No kidding. We've not only been greatly impacted, we don't have any business. Almost all travel advisors and travel agencies today, over 90%, I'd say, at least, of their income comes from commissions paid by cruise lines to us for selling cruises. And obviously, with not even knowing when we can resume, it's been very difficult to be able to sell a cruise with all of these unknowns and uncertainties going on. And she quotes that the travel advisors, if the cruise lines were on the sidelines, the travel advisors felt like we were in the grandstand because we've been able to make no comments or no impact. Nobody really cares what we think about this whole situation. So as I reported to you on last week's podcast, I was very encouraged that we had received the report of the Healthy Sail Panel, Set Sail Panel, that we had received CLIA's mandatory protocols, and all of that looked like it was going to be doable. So it looked like a really comprehensive plan that there was no way the CDC was not going to fully embrace that and say, this is wonderful, let's proceed and go and reopen sailing. Well, obviously this week I'm disappointed because that didn't happen. So all I can tell you is that we are on standby again. Hopefully when I visit with you again next week, I'll have a lot more definitive information. We'll be waiting for tomorrow's meeting at the White House to see what comes of it, if anything. And we are so anxious to get back to cruising, get back to sailing, getting back to travel. So again, I hope to have more for you next week. All right, now here's one of the challenges we're going to be facing on reopening. We have a cruise line known as TUI, T-U-I Cruises, and those of you who have cruised often in the Caribbean have seen their ships. They're all black. You can't miss them. They're called Mein Schiff, the German My Ship. They have started cruising in Greece. The Mein Schiff 6 started cruising last week. But on Monday, Greek authorities said 12 crew members of the Mein Schiff 6 on a Greek island tour with more than 1,500 people on board had tested positive. So we had 12 crew members test positive. By Tuesday afternoon, all 12 crew members had tested negative 3 times. Okay, false alarm. This is the problem we're going to have. We have all of a sudden we have pre-testing, we have people wearing masks. The crew members have no symptoms. They do a random testing of 150 crew members. Out of that, 12 test positive. All 12 get 3 new tests. All 3 tests are negative. Again, a false positive. So testing is not the answer to everything. Masks are not the answer to everything either. And so if the CDC or if you're thinking about cruising percent guaranteed proposition, that's wrong, because there's still going to be a lot of unknowns with this whole thing, even if and when we get a vaccine. So why does this happen? Harvard Health Publishing, that's what these crew members had, ranges from 2% to 30%. But false positives are more rare and likely in 5% of cases or less. But if we're just, again, or test positive for the virus, it's going to be a challenge. So we'll just have to see how we're going to be able to combat that. By the way, TUI Cruises is based in Germany. Pretty much, I don't think they do bookings with anybody other than German citizens. Further, The U.S. Federal Time Commissioner report, I don't know where he's been, but he issued a report. His name is Louis E. Sola, and he says there's an urgent need for the cruise industry to resume sailing. I mean, what more do you need from the CDC? Here we are, the United States Federal Maritime Commissioner. He's saying to resume sailing, urgent need to resume sailing Florida's cruise ports, citing staggering losses to revenue, local employment, and the contributions cruise industry. Sola indicates that Florida has lost $3.2 billion in economic activity, 49,500 local jobs paying approximately $2.3 billion in wages. Yeah, one of the problems with this whole pandemic is numbers have gotten so inflated and blown out of proportion that, $2 or $3 billion sounds like chump change anymore when we talk about trillions of dollars in aid relief packages and things like that, and hundreds of thousands of cases. So all of the numbers have really gotten blown out of proportion. For us here at Port Canaveral, losses for Port Canaveral are pegged at 79% of its annual passengers and 16,000 individual jobs. With no cruises sailing from the port since early March, though the annual U.S. $1.3 billion that it contributed to the local economy by the cruise industry in Port Canaveral and its surrounding area is at high risk. Looks like we here in Brevard County and surrounding areas such as Orange County with the theme parks stand to lose somewhere around $1.3 billion in our economy. That's a pretty big hit to a county of our size. Finally, Mr. Sola, the commissioner, the U.S. Maritime Commissioner, ends with, it's not just large companies that benefit from the cruise industry. Cruise customers begin and end their voyages by using taxis, eating in restaurants, and visiting museums and shopping in local businesses. So, and there's your neighborhood travel advisor. Okay, here's another attempt to get things going, to get you in the third leg of the stool I'm talking about, and that's to get you back to traveling. American, United, and JetBlue, and Hawaiian Airlines are rolling out passenger testing for COVID-19. Airlines hope for a breakthrough to reassure passengers who are worried about contracting coronavirus on flights is finally coming, the ability to offer testing. Now, I don't know why you should be worried about contracting coronavirus, because obviously the masks are absolutely so effective that if you're wearing one, that eliminates 100%, and if the other person's wearing it, that eliminates the other 100% chance that you're going to contact the virus. So with all these wonderful masks, I just don't understand why you could possibly be worried. Anyway, if you are, on Tuesday, American Airlines joined JetBlue Airways, United, and Hawaiian Airlines in announcing its plans to provide tests that can improve passengers in providing tests that can prove passengers don't have COVID-19, allowing them to bypass quarantine restrictions depending on where they are traveling. The testing will be provided as a convenience to travelers. However, they're going to charge for it. The airlines are not making them mandatory, and they are not free. Prices range from $80 to $250 depending on the airline and how the tests are done. Now, basically what they're doing is, as we reported last week, Hawaii is proposing, although they've slipped this deadline several times. By the way, the state of Hawaii has 1.3 million people. They've had 94 deaths, but they have shut down their economy and their state absolutely, completely. Still to this day, to the point that when last week, when our grandchildren and children went to the beach, okay, lots of airflow, lots of salt there. They had to social distance between each other in the family. Okay, that's how bad Hawaii has shut down things. And you know how many deaths they've had? 94. But they have ruined and devastated a wonderful place and a wonderful economy that I'm not sure will ever recover. I think Hawaii is on the verge and could possibly become just a banana republic because of of what they've done to themselves. But anyway, the governor in his infinite wisdom has said you can now travel to Hawaii and you don't have to quarantine yourself for 14 days in your hotel room, even your meals. You can't go to a restaurant if you do that. If you have a COVID-19 test within 72 hours that's negative of you arriving in Hawaii. Now that's, of course, even if you have a negative test and you walk out of the room and you're exposed to it and then you become positive, that's okay. You had a negative test within 72 hours, so that's going to prevent everything. I know everybody keeps saying, listen to the scientists. Doesn't sound very scientific to me. Anyway, so if you want to go to Hawaii after October 15th, and this is happening with a bunch of Caribbean islands also, they've I don't know why they're copying Hawaii, because they're going to be they have less government support in these Caribbean islands than the Hawaiians are getting from you, the taxpayers here in the mainland. But this is how it's going to work. Depending on the airline, the test can be administered at home or taken in person at clinics or near designated airports. In United's case, the test results are given to the passenger on paper or electronically to present to authorities in Hawaii. American said it will offer rapid testing at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport for Hawaii flights through a clinic chain called CareNow starting October 15th. It will also offer at-home testing through Let's Get Checked. United is working with Go Health Urgent Care and its partner Dignity Health, initiating testing from a single airport, San Francisco International, for flights going to Hawaii. So this is going to have pretty limited scope here, okay, because unless you're near Dallas or San Francisco. Now, they are also going to allow an in-home test. The tests generally involve taking samples via a shallow swab of the nostrils, not the deeper insertions in the nose, which you've heard all about how painful that is. JetBlue cautions that many but not all jurisdictions allow home-administered PCR tests. So that's going to be a good question, whether you can do the test at home, mail in the results, and by the way, you're responsible for paying for the FedEx charges to get the results there. But how are we going to know who tested what if you're doing an in-home test? It's like the guys at the methadone clinic that pays the guys to pee in the bottle for them. How do you know the person who gets on the airplane is the one with the negative test? Interesting proposition. Okay, what's it going to cost? United is charging $250 at the airport, the one airport, San Francisco, and $80 for the at-home test, plus the overnight delivery fees you have to pay for. Hawaiian's test is $90 for the advanced test and $150 for Day of Travel Express service. Now, Hawaiian claims that they're going to be able to you can go just before you get on the airplane, fly to Hawaii, and by the time you land, they'll have the results of whether you're negative or positive. The problem is, if you get on the airplane and you fly and you get there and you're positive, boom, you're in a 14-day quarantine or till when you leave. All right. What's interesting about this whole thing is that Southwest and Delta Southwest made no comment. Delta has said that they are testing their own crew members, but they have not placed any plans in place to test the public or their passengers. So we shall see. This testing testing people with no symptoms. I'm just not sure how effective that's going to be. The cruise industry is relying on this very much so to say, okay, now everything will be safe. Again, I question if everybody on the ship has tested negative, why is everybody on the ship going to have to wear a mask? Is the test not effective? Is the test not accurate? So you have to worry about the mask. If the test is accurate, but you can contact the virus immediately after having the test and be asymptomatic and spread it around, then why bother with the test to begin with? Well, these are some of the questions that we'll have going forward. We hope you'll join us again next week when we come back to you with Just Cruising, the podcast about